Okay, Genesis chapter 30. It's a longer section actually today, so second half of chapter 30, and then we'll continue on through 31, all the way through the end of chapter 31. So significant amount of reading today, and so the handout is a little bit brief as we just take a look at the narrative. I think at a high level, it'll just help frame it for us before we read. So in this point, we saw last week the strife and the rivalry between Jacob's wives, but we also saw how God was blessing Jacob abundantly with children in a short period of time. And so the second half of chapter 30 is going to continue in developing how Jacob is being blessed extraordinarily by God in spite of both Laban's best efforts to claim that wealth for his, and even some superstition on the part of Jacob, perhaps. But as that wealth increases, and we've seen this pattern throughout Genesis so far, as the blessing of God comes and wealth increases, it often spurs trouble. Trouble for those who surround, those who may be jealous of the wealth, those who may envy it, and those who do not have faith in God. Of course, the blessing of God that he gave to Abraham, to Isaac, and now to Jacob is evident in the abundance of wealth that these men continue to acquire against their own, or in spite of their own deserving. So we have Jacob in this servitude to Laban, and then God is going to call Jacob out of this land, out from under the service of Laban, and he's going to call him to leave and return to the land of his father. And this narrative, most folks see pretty readily that this parallels, or at least alludes to, the future exodus of Israel, in which they're going to depart from Egypt. There's the call of God, and so we'll see many overlapping themes. And so if we wanted to think of this in terms of what it is greatly anticipating, I think we can think of it in terms of the Exodus, and then all that the Bible goes on to talk about how the Exodus relates to the life of an individual believer as well. But for now, or for this week, we're mainly just going to focus on the narrative as it is given to us. So I would like to have a few readers, since it's a larger section this morning. The first reader could take verse 25, chapter 30, starting in verse 25 to the end of the chapter. Go ahead, Rhett, and then we'll do 31 through 1 through 21. Yeah, so we can break this up into 3 or 4, depending on how we want to. But 1 through 21, Mark, go ahead. And then we have 22 through 42. Thanks, Garrett. And then 43 to the end, Ralph. All right, go ahead, brothers.
Everyone that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and black among the lambs, it
Go ahead. Yep, thanks. Excuse me.
Now Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has gained all his wealth. And Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers, and to your kindred, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flock was, and said to them, I see that your father does not regard me with favor as he did before. But the God of
flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do this day to these my daughters, or to their children whom they have borne? So now come, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. Jacob said to his kinsmen, gather stones. So they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there by the heap. And Laban called it Jagar Shahudatha, which means heap of witness in Aramaic. Jacob called it Galid, which in Hebrew means heap of witness. Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me for this day. Therefore it was named Galid. And Mizpah, for he said, Mizpah was meaning watchtower, may the Lord watch between you and me when we are absent one from another. If you mistreat my daughters, or if you take wives besides my daughters, although no man is with us, see, God is witness between you and me. Laban said to Jacob, behold this heap, and behold the pillar which I have set between you and me. The heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness, that I will not pass by this heap to you for harm, and you will not pass by this heap and this pillar to me for harm. The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their fathers, judge between us. So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. Then Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain, and called his kinsmen to the meal, and they ate the meal and spent the night on the mountain. Early in the morning Laban arose and kissed his sons and his daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned to his place.
Thank you, brothers. So hopefully as we read that, you saw some of the parallels where there is great blessing as Jacob is in this position of a servant, almost a captive servant to Laban. That blessing becomes almost a liability, or it becomes a threat to Laban as Jacob falls out of favor with Laban's sons and with Laban himself. This then culminates when God calls Jacob to leave and to not leave anything behind. So he takes all his wealth, his possessions, his family, and he departs. Then, of course, the one who had held him in some bondage pursues, and even as Jacob had crossed the Euphrates, Laban pursued, he catches up. And then the difference would be, if you're thinking of this in terms of the Exodus with Israel, would be at the end, of course, God vanquishes the foes of Egypt, the foes of Israel, which is the Egyptians. But here we have father-in-law and son, and so there is this covenant between them that reconciles or brings peace. So that's where we're going. We have it broken up into those 4 parts. So with the 20 minutes or so that we have, let's look at this briefly. So his blessing, the blessing that Jacob acquired while he is in service, begins in chapter 30 with the verse 25, when it says, now Rachel had borne Joseph, and that is the time in which Jacob says, it is time for me to depart. So it's interesting picking up on the narrative that we had last week. It wasn't until Rachel finally bears a son, that Jacob has his first inclination now that this is the time for me to leave. It seems he is thinking to himself, well, now finally I have offspring, finally I have a seed, finally this is secure, and he's looking to the future now. So it reinforces how Rachel was his favorite wife here. Now, Jacob had served Laban for these 14 years, but Jacob asks something of Laban in here. Verse 26, give me my wives and my children, whom I have served you for, and let me depart. And I find this peculiar. Maybe I don't understand the cultural context, but as he asks for all of them to be given, it seems odd that almost as if they were under Laban's control this whole time. It emphasizes the fact that Laban had control over Jacob's affairs in some way. And so they're going to go into this discussion in which Laban is now trying to convince Jacob to stay. Why does Laban want to convince Jacob to stay? Ah, yes. So the blessing of God upon Jacob is evident. It's there. But who does Laban credit for knowing that? He says, how does Laban know that the blessing of God is on him? He divined it, yes. Yeah, sorry, I misheard it, what you said. Yes, he divined it, or by divination. And so this is not Laban looking at it with the eyes of faith and saying, I see the blessing of God is evident upon you, but giving credit in some ways to this divination or this superstitious practice as having revealed to him. And this is going to be a little bit of a through line in this, in that continually Laban is going to deny the fact that the blessing has come from God. He wants to keep the credit for himself. And the way in which we have the household gods playing into this as well is that on the one hand we have Laban giving the credit to divination or seeking to retrieve his household gods as if the blessing came from some other way. But Jacob will continually attest to the fact that this blessing comes from Yahweh, from the God who has covenanted with him and his fathers. And so there is a how would you say it? Competition makes it sound like they're equal footing, but there is two things put against each other, the God of Laban and the God of Jacob. And this is very similar to how we know the plagues in Egypt, the gods of the plagues of Egypt against the God of Israel, and of course who will triumph in the end. So that kind of cues us into that here, as we see that Laban gives the credit to this for by divination. So in your handout 1:4, the blessing received by Laban for the sake of Jacob, we already said, is evident. And Laban is willing to secure its future by whatever wages necessary. And Jacob's response is interesting here too then. He even calls out Laban. Let me see if I can find the verse quickly. Verse 29, you yourself know how I have served you and how your cattle have fared. For you had little before I came, and it increased to a multitude, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I turned. And so Jacob kind of points out, you know this, Laban, in your own conscience, it seems. So Jacob is about to leave, but instead he decides, I will sign on for another period of time with Laban in exchange for some wages. But there's something interesting about the wages. Jacob understands that Laban is one disposed to trick him, and so he comes up with this way, okay, here's how you're going to pay me. This is going to be something that is, how would you describe this? Jacob wants wages they can't be argued about. They can't come back and say, oh, you stole those. So he wants wages that are indisputable. I want it to be clear that these things are mine, and even that they are from the Lord, interestingly enough, because who has it in his power to give spotted or speckled sheep? Well, it's the Lord, of course. So Laban agrees to the wages, but immediately Laban does what? And then he took the males and the females, the spotted and striped, away from the flock and hid them. So now you can see almost immediately, before Jacob even has a chance to take his role as a shepherd, the game has changed again. This should reinforce something about how Laban regards Jacob. How does Laban regard Jacob in this? Kind of just emphasizing what we already said, but Jacob is, of course, benefit to him for his own gain. But when we think about this in terms of the blessing of Abraham, I will bless those who bless you, right? A faithful response would have been for Laban to bless Jacob, but this is the opposite of that. This is Laban looking to extract wealth from Jacob, to take what he can, even to go back on his word. So he does not regard Jacob according to the promise of God, but only by what he can gain. And then in the end, so Jacob takes over shepherding Laban's flock, and Jacob does this interesting practice. What does he do? He takes the sticks that would have light-colored flesh wood, and he peels the bark off in places resembling stripes and spots, and he puts the sticks in at the water trough where the sheep would come. This would be the place where breeding would happen. And the idea was, if the sheep are looking at the stripes and the spots while the breeding is happening, then he's going to get stripes and spotted sheep. And not only that, he does it only when there's the strong sheep there, so that he can get the strong sheep from the flock. Now, is there any merit to what Jacob is doing here? Is there any natural power in what is in this, or any science behind this, if we want to use that term? No, there's nothing, at least nothing that we've been able to discover at all in this. But God still blesses in it, doesn't he? God still blesses for the sake of his covenant promises. So we see here that even Jacob, perhaps, and one commentator I think put it nicely. I had the quote in here, but then I took it out so it all fit on one page. But there's one commentator said, we don't understand God's providence here. We submit to it. Why did God choose to bless Jacob in this way, like through almost a superstitious practice of Jacob? Other than, we don't know particularly, but we do submit to it, and we see that God's hand was the one doing this, not of Jacob. And Jacob is going to confess as much even later on. So I think...
Even the heart of man God directs too, so maybe there was obviously direction. He did something.
Right.
So there was inward working within the person.
Right.
I mean, we could ask ourselves, why do we do certain things?
Exactly.
Some of it's mysterious.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's definitely all tainted by sin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do we know how long that period was of the covenant between, not the covenant, but the time of he made this agreement on the sheep? We don't really know.
We do, because he says later he served for his wives 14 years, and he served for the flocks for 6 years, for a total of 20 years. So yeah, this is a 6-year period, almost 7. So it's almost 3 sevens, but taken away before that occurs, which maybe there's something there, I don't know. Okay, so the theme there is God is blessing even as Jacob is subject to Laban and subject to Laban's plots and foils, his attempt to extort from Jacob what belongs to him. So now we come to the section that is I've titled Exodus from Laban. So this begins in chapter 30. First thing we meet with in chapter 31, first thing we meet with is that Jacob hears the words of Laban's son, saying, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, and from what belonged to our father he has made all this well. So the sons of Laban look out and they say, wow, Jacob is acquiring much wealth through this deal. But they think to themselves, well, where did he get all this wealth? Didn't he get it from Laban? Didn't he get it from our father? Is he not taking what would belong to us? So there's a battle between the sons and the son-in-law in this case. And the sons of Laban are giving credit to their father. And likely, remember again, Laban, the one who would divine, or the one who'd go, they're going to go pursue specifically to recover their household gods. So in this theme is the credit here to Laban and to his idolatrous practice, or is it to God? And so this is now, and Jacob saw that the attitude of Laban was not friendly to him as it was before. And this reminds us of something in Exodus. Does anyone know what this would remind us of in Exodus? Remember at the end of Genesis, all of Jacob's clan is going to end up in Egypt. And the Pharaoh at that time is friendly towards them, giving them land to stay. But as they prosper, as they become numerous, a new Egyptian Pharaoh arises who does not remember the days. And so their relationship to Pharaoh is going to change. And now it's one, they're going to be enslaved. Well, something similar here seems like the relationship between Laban and Jacob is now strained to the point where he's not even looked favorably anymore. There's tension there. And so God then comes. It's in this situation that the Lord calls Jacob to return to the land of his father. So he's to forsake the land of Assyria, and leave his service to his father-in-law and go to the land which God had called Abraham. We've seen this many times. Then calling his wives, Jacob does something here that is commendable, probably. He recounts all of this to his wives and even relays not only this, but the appearance of the angel of the Lord, the same one who had appeared to him at Bethel. He relates the command of God to return from Canaan. Specifically, God had what? Specifically, though, I'm going to try to find the verse so I can read it. How God had blessed him in acquiring all these flocks. Surely the wealth which God has taken, that's what they say. I apologize here. I'm looking for where God says, where Jacob recounts how God had seen the affliction that he was under and had blessed him for it. Verse 12. Yes, there it is. Okay. He said, lift up your eyes and see that all the male goats. Wait, hold on. Not quite.
Yeah, that's the second half of the verse.
Okay, thank you. It was tucked in the margin. For I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. I have seen your affliction. And this is going to be repeated later in the chapter as well, as he recounts. Had God not seen all the affliction that was happening? Again, when the children of Israel are in bondage in Egypt, the repeated refrain is, God has seen your struggle, God has seen your affliction, and has come to rescue you. So the wives here, interestingly enough, would you say these two sisters are generally unified and friends, or usually at odds with one another? They're at odds, yes. But in this case, they're what? They're unified, yeah. They're unified in what God has revealed and in their need to depart. So they encourage Jacob in obedience in this matter. So when Jacob leaves, he leaves without warning, and he takes all that he has, his wives, his children, his livestock, his wealth. He crosses the Euphrates, he heads towards the hill country. He journeys 3 days before his exodus is discovered. All of those things bringing other things to mind as we think about the way God is going to work in the lives of the nation, in the nation of Israel to come. So God has brought Jacob out from under the service of Laban. So the next part we have is the pursuit and then the deliverance from Laban that we have here. So this is interesting as well. Laban gives chase. How many days does he pursue? 7 days. Apparently, what was his intent, you think? What was Laban? Why does he take not just himself, but he takes his kinsmen, takes a posse, and pursues hard for 7 days? What's his intent? Possibly even to do harm, to bring back by force, at a bare minimum, right, to persuade Jacob to come back into service. He's not one to let Jacob go easily. So, entice Jacob to return or reclaim some of the wealth. But Laban's restrained by God, warning him through what? In a dream? There's other places in Scripture we hear of God warning people in a dream, but here Laban is restrained from doing what he intends by God warning him in a dream. So then we come into the last portion of our narrative today where there's dialogue between these two, and that reveals quite a bit to us. So first we have Laban's accusations against Jacob, and I'm straining for time this morning. But if we looked through those accusations, we can kind of understand something about Laban again, looking at his relationship to, or his relation to men and how he judges them, and then his relation to God. First, his judgments, he accuses Jacob of stealing his daughters and treating them as slaves, driving them away as slaves, when in reality the very opposite was happening. He even accuses Jacob of stealing the gods, not necessarily his daughters, and the opposite has happened again. So in his judgments, at least it seems Laban is partial here. He's judging the son-in-law and in treating the wives to some extent with some innocence. So he's partial. But in his relation to God, he is proud. So God had restrained him, but he goes on and he boasts of his power. Don't you know it's in my power that I could have done something? The only reason I'm not doing it is because I chose to follow the advice of God in the dream. That's kind of the mode that he seems to be communicating in. When in reality, of course, it is God's hand that has restrained him. And he should have been humble before God. So this reveals something of Laban. But then Jacob, in response to the accusation of the idols, of course, he's overly confident here, but he's a little bit restrained at first. He says, death to the one who has taken it. And of course, Jacob doesn't know who has taken these. His favorite wife, Rachel. Now, if Jacob had known who had taken it or had investigated on his own, certainly he may not have made such a rash vow. It was rash for Jacob to assume such moral superiority here. But here we come to think of the contrast between the household gods that Laban is most aggravated were stolen, the household gods that Rachel stole, and Laban's pursuit to recover them, versus the God of Jacob, who is now freeing him from the tyranny of Laban. You could think how this would play out, right? If Laban uncovers the fact that the idols are in Rachel's possession, one way or another, Jacob is going to end up back in service to Laban, probably at the threat of killing his wife or taking his wife from him. One way or another, what's at stake here is very much the victory of Laban and the demise of Jacob's returning to the promised land. So there is this clash here. But which God is the one that needs hiding and the one that needs stealing? Of course, the household gods. And as we think about that even, there's an interesting parallel that I did not see this at first, but someone else brought up. As Rachel is in her, it says the way of women's with her, this would be a time of impurity compared to the ceremonial law. And so here, the household gods are impure, they're unclean, they are treated in this way. And so there's that is in contrast to the success that God is going to give here. So while Laban's gods, lowercase g, had to be hidden, it was the God of Abraham that was delivering Jacob from the hand of his pursuer. All right. Finally, then we get to the covenant between these men. So Laban's search is unsuccessful. Jacob is infuriated. Probably, what would we call that? If someone comes and rummages through all your wives, all your children's things, all your possessions, and comes up empty-handed in their accusation, you've now suffered what? Humiliation at their hand. So Jacob has been humiliated. And so, So 4.1 for the humiliation that he had received, and then the last blank there. Sorry, my eyes are skipping rows. Oh, okay. Oh, sorry, yeah. So the last blank is the mercy of God there. So Laban, the 20 years to accuse Laban, the intent to defraud, that he was only overcome. Laban's attempt was only overcome by the mercy of God, and the mercy of Abraham and Isaac's God. So Laban replies to Jacob's, I'm just trying to make sure I'm following the blanks here real quick. Yes. So Jacob makes reply. Jacob's kind of defending himself. He raises all these things that he has done. In some way, probably overinflates even what he himself has done. You can see the ego of both of these going at it in the way it's written. But still, Laban is unwilling to admit what? What is Laban's reply here is striking. Then Laban replied to Jacob, "The daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks my flocks. All that you see is mine." Laban is yet unwilling to admit that the blessing has come from God. He claims to be the source and the owner of all that Jacob had acquired. But God has restrained him. He understands that and this is his daughter, these are his grandchildren, and so he will not inflict harm on them. So he suggests a covenant. This is, of course, wise. There's a little bit of wisdom here from Laban, actually, from the older one. Jacob agrees by adding to be the first one to add the stone to the pile. So Laban's wise proposal of a covenant. Jacob agrees. So they erect a monument, and it is named. Vows were made. Bread was broken. All of this to memorialize their agreement of peace. And then the last thought here, that I think is helpful for us to realize, in spite of all the ceremony that happens here at this covenant, what really gives this covenant its staying power, its force? What is it that really makes it so that both of these men have come to agree to disagree and part ways without conflict? They both have acknowledged something. Okay, before God. I think that's the key here, before God. They both express, even if weakly, a fear of God. There's a way in which they have, Laban has certainly wanted vengeance, but he left vengeance to God. The covenant curses are left to God to invoke. And so there's a great wisdom here in just recognizing that though one is defrauded, perhaps both were guilty of tricking the other, and there was no earthly reconciliation, yet there was protection from further harm and from further sin by recognizing that vengeance belongs to God and he will deal what is just. So God has now redeemed Jacob out from under the hand of Laban and secured him on his way toward the promised land. All right. Thoughts or questions or just comments, observations? Yeah. Yeah, I actually read suggestions to both. Some people suggested she takes the household gods to rid her father of them. I don't read it quite in that way, because to me, if that was what you were doing, you would just destroy them. You wouldn't take them and claim them. But, right. So I take this more as Rachel being duplicitous like Laban. Rachel is the one like Rebekah, like Laban. Duplicitous, meaning two, like she shows some allegiance to Jacob and to God, but also wants to add to it the idols of Laban, the blessing, right? She's going to leave her father, but she's going to take with her some of that. And yeah, you have something to add there?
I think it's kind of like you see today in syncretism. So yes, God is God, and we trust ourselves in Jesus, but these other things too, we'll just kind of hedge our bets, like, a little superstition, a little astrology, a little this, a little that, and mixing all these things to
Right.
make man's unfaithful.
Yeah, and you think about what am I trying to say? The multiplication of gods in the old, even in current days, but in paganism, often is you pay respects to this god to make sure this happens, and to this god to make sure that happens. And just like you said, you're hedging your bets. You're making sure all parties are favorable towards you. And then it's also, so interestingly, I think one commentator helpfully pointed out that it's likely that these gods are the names of gods that later appear in the life of Israel as they are prone to idolatry, because this would be the importing of certain Syrian gods that crop up later. So I don't remember the names, but
We're going to see that even in the passage today too. All men are prone to idolatry because we were made to worship, but if we do not worship the one true God, we will worship something or somebody.
right, yeah. So I think just to say the consequences of it seem to be negative if there's idolatry cropping up later. So good question. Okay, let's pray. Lord, thank you for your kindness in Genesis. Turn our hearts now to eagerly desire further to hear from you as we sing and as we anticipate Habakkuk and how you have proclaimed your truth to your people and corrected them and corrected their idolatry, and how you declare that you are enthroned in heaven, that you do whatever you please, Lord. Please purge our hearts of what is idolatrous and set our affections on you this morning. Amen.